Millionaire's twins were blind, until the new maid did something that changed everything. Marcus Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a glittering web. His pharmaceutical empire had made him one of the richest men in America, but wealth couldn't cure everything. Behind him, his twin daughters Sophia and Elena, both 16, sat in their usual spots on the Italian leather sofa, their unseeing eyes focused on nothing. They had been blind since birth, a cruel genetic twist that no amount of money could fix. "The new cleaning service is sending someone today," Marcus called over his shoulder, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had tried everything. The girls barely acknowledged him, lost in their own world of darkness and whispered conversations. Sophia's fingers traced the spine of a braille book while Elena hummed a melody only she could hear. Marcus had hired the best doctors, consulted specialists across 3 continents, and even funded experimental research, but nothing had worked. The twins' blindness was complete, permanent, and according to every expert he'd consulted, irreversible. The elevator chimed, and Marcus turned to see a woman in her 50s step into the penthouse. She was unremarkable in appearance, with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing the standard uniform of the cleaning company. "Mr. Blackwood." "I'm Catherine Morris, your new housekeeper," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. Something about her presence seemed to fill the room with an odd energy, and Marcus noticed his daughters had both turned their heads toward her voice with unusual interest. "Welcome, Ms. Morris. The twins are Sophia and Elena," he gestured toward his daughters. "They'll stay out of your way." Catherine approached the girls with measured steps, and Marcus was surprised when Sophia spoke up. "You smell like lavender and something else. Something I've never smelled before," Sophia said, her voice curious rather than dismissive. Catherine smiled and knelt beside them. "That would be sage, dear. I grow it in my garden along with other special herbs." Elena reached out tentatively, and Catherine took her hand without hesitation. "Your hands are warm," Elena whispered, "but they tingle." As days passed, Catherine's presence in the penthouse became more than just cleaning. She would sit with the twins during their afternoon tea, telling them stories of distant lands and ancient remedies that seemed too fantastical to be real. "In the mountains of Peru," Catherine would begin, her voice weaving magic into the air, "there grows a flower that blooms only under the full moon. The locals call it God's tears because legend says it holds the power to restore what was lost." Sophia and Elena hung on every word, their faces more animated than Marcus had seen them in years. Marcus initially dismissed these tales as harmless entertainment, but he noticed changes in his daughters. They seemed more energetic, more hopeful, and strangely, they had begun describing things they couldn't possibly see. "The sunset tonight must be beautiful," Sophia had said one evening. "I can feel the orange and pink colors warming my face." Marcus had stopped mid-stride, staring at his daughter who sat with her face turned toward the window, her blind eyes somehow aware of the spectacular sunset painting the sky. Elena had nodded in agreement, adding, "The clouds look like ships sailing across a golden sea." These weren't descriptions they could have heard from anyone else. Marcus had been alone with them. The breakthrough came on a stormy Thursday evening in October. Catherine had stayed late due to the weather, and Marcus found her in the twins' room, sitting between their beds as lightning illuminated the penthouse. In her hands, she held a small vial filled with what appeared to be ordinary water, but it seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. "What is that?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. Catherine looked up at him with eyes that suddenly seemed far older than her 50-some years. "Something I've been preparing since the day I met your daughters, Mr. Blackwood. A mixture of rare plants, blessed under 7 full moons, and infused with intention stronger than your skepticism." Sophia sat up in her bed, her face turned toward Catherine with desperate hope. "Will it help us see, Catherine?" she whispered. "Will we finally see our father's face?" Elena's hand found her sister's, their fingers intertwining as they had done since childhood. Catherine's voice was gentle but firm as she replied, "This isn't magic in the way you might think, girls. It's something far older and more powerful. It's the universe's way of correcting an ancient wrong." Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring. "I won't let you experiment on my daughters with some folk remedy." But Sophia's voice cut through his objections like a blade. "Please, Papa. We've lived in darkness for 16 years. If there's even a chance." Elena nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We've tried everything else. Every doctor, every treatment, every hope has been crushed. What do we have to lose? Catherine stood slowly, the vial seeming to pulse with warm light in the storm's electrical atmosphere. Mr. Blackwood, what I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about medicine, about science, about the very nature of reality itself. She moved to the window, her silhouette stark against the lightning. Your daughters weren't born blind due to genetics. They were cursed, Mr. Blackwood. Cursed by someone who wanted to ensure your family line would never again see the truth about who you really are. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as memories he had buried deep began to surface. The research facility in Cambodia, the indigenous shaman whose village he had destroyed to build his first pharmaceutical plant, the old woman's dying words echoing in languages he didn't understand. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he sank into the nearest chair as Catherine continued. That shaman placed a curse on your bloodline, Mr. Blackwood. Your daughters were born blind not as punishment for your sins, but as protection from the horrors you've unleashed upon the world. The vial in Catherine's hand now glowed brighter, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I am her granddaughter, sent to complete what she began. But I've watched your daughters these past months, seen their pure hearts, their kindness despite their darkness. They don't deserve to pay for your crimes. Sophia and Elena sat frozen, their world shifting on its axis as they processed Catherine's words. Papa. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. What did you do? Marcus buried his face in his hands, the weight of decades of buried guilt crushing down upon him. I built my empire on blood, girls, destroyed villages, poisoned rivers, killed anyone who stood in my way. I told myself it was for the greater good, for progress, for... His voice broke. I told myself it was for you. Catherine approached the twins, the vial warm in her palms. But here's what your father doesn't know. The curse can be broken. The shaman's granddaughter has the power to restore your sight, but only if he confesses his crimes and makes amends for every life is destroyed. Lightning crashed overhead as Catherine uncorked the vial, releasing a fragrance that seemed to contain all the flowers that had ever bloomed. The choice is yours, Mr. Blackwood. Confess your sins to the world, surrender your empire to help those you've harmed, and your daughters will see. Continue to hide behind your wealth and power, and they remain in darkness forever. Sophia reached out blindly, finding her father's hand. Papa, please. We don't need your money or your empire. We just want to see your face, to see the world, to live. Elena added her voice to her sister's plea. We'll love you regardless of what you've done, but please, give us this chance. Marcus looked at Catherine, seeing her clearly for the first time, not just a cleaning lady, but a guardian angel sent to offer redemption he didn't deserve. If I confess, if I give up everything, they'll truly see. Catherine nodded solemnly. They'll see everything, Mr. Blackwood. The beauty of sunrise, the colors of autumn leaves, your face when you smile with genuine joy instead of calculated charm. They'll see the world as it truly is, both its darkness and its light. Tears streamed down Marcus's face as he made his decision. Then I confess. I confess to everything. Every village burned, every life lost, every crime committed in the name of progress and profit. I surrender it all for my daughter's sight. Catherine smiled and held the vial to Sophia's lips. Drink, child, and see the truth of all things. Sophia drank deeply, the liquid tasting like sunshine and hope, and immediately her eyes began to change. The cloudy whiteness that had obscured her vision since birth began to clear like morning mist, revealing irises of the deepest blue. She blinked once, twice, and then gasped as colors exploded into her consciousness for the first time. Elena, she cried, seeing her twin sister's face, identical to her own but uniquely beautiful. Elena drank next, her transformation equally miraculous, and the sisters spent precious minutes simply staring at each other, memorizing features they had only known through touch. Then they turned to their father, seeing him clearly for the first time, not the powerful billionaire the world knew, but a broken man who had sacrificed everything for their sake. Catherine gathered her things quietly, her mission complete, but Sophia caught her hand. Thank you, she whispered, seeing the kind eyes that had guided them through darkness. Will we see you again? Catherine smiled, and for a moment, her face seemed to shimmer with the same ethereal light as the vial. Every time you choose to see the good in the world despite its darkness, you'll see me. As she stepped into the elevator, Marcus called out, What happens now? Catherine's final words echoed as the doors closed. Now, Mr. Blackwood, you learn to see too. What if everything you believed about miracles was wrong? Marcus Blackwood's pharmaceutical empire had made him billions, but it couldn't cure his twin daughter's blindness until a mysterious cleaning lady arrived with secrets that would shatter his world. In a story that challenges the boundaries between science and magic, justice and mercy, witness how one man's darkest sins led to his daughter's greatest gift. But Catherine Morris isn't just any housekeeper, and the cure she carries comes with a price that will force a father to choose between his empire and his children's sight. Prepare for a tale where ancient curses collide with modern wealth, where redemption comes in the form of an ordinary woman with extraordinary power, and where seeing clearly means confronting the ugliest truths about ourselves. This is a story that will make you question what you'd sacrifice for the people you love most. The sterile halls of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals had witnessed many dark secrets, but none darker than the one Marcus carried in his heart as he walked past portraits of indigenous healers his company had studied over the years. 20 years ago, in the remote villages of Cambodia, he had made a discovery that would change everything. A rare plant with extraordinary healing properties that the local shamans had guarded for centuries. These people are sitting on a gold mine, he had told his research team, his eyes gleaming with the promise of billions in pharmaceutical patents. The village elder, an ancient woman named Kimley Shrey, had refused to share their sacred knowledge with outsiders, warning that their plants were protected by spirits and meant only for their own people. Marcus had laughed at her superstitions, but his laughter died when she spoke in perfect English. Your greed will blind your bloodline, Mr. Blackwood. Your children will pay for your sins with their sight. Her words had seemed like the desperate threats of a primitive woman facing the inevitable march of progress. Marcus had proceeded with his plans, bulldozing the sacred groves and forcing the villagers from their ancestral home. When Kimley Shrey died during the forced relocation, her granddaughter had screamed curses in the ancient Khmer language that made even his hardened security team uncomfortable. Marcus had dismissed the incident as necessary collateral damage in the pursuit of medical advancement, but when his wife gave birth to twin daughters 2 years later, both born completely blind despite no genetic predisposition, the old woman's words began to haunt him. It's just a coincidence, he told himself repeatedly, pouring millions into research to find a cure for his daughter's condition. Every specialist he consulted gave him the same verdict. The girl's blindness was complete and unexplainable, with no physical damage to their eyes or optical nerves that would account for their condition. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the most renowned pediatric ophthalmologist in the world, had been particularly baffled. Mr. Blackwood, I've never seen anything like this, she had admitted after exhaustive testing. Their eyes are structurally perfect, their brains show normal activity in the visual cortex when stimulated, but somehow the connection just isn't there. She had paused, her scientific mind struggling with the impossible. It's almost as if something is actively blocking their ability to see, but that's medically impossible. Marcus had funded entire research wings, sponsored symposiums, and even established a foundation in his daughters' names, all while secretly knowing that no amount of money could break what wasn't a medical condition at all. The twins grew up in a world of darkness, but their other senses had developed with supernatural acuity. Sophia could identify people by the sound of their heartbeat, while Elena could sense emotional states through subtle changes in body temperature and scent. They moved through their father's penthouse with the grace of dancers, never bumping into furniture or walls, as if guided by an invisible hand. Papa, Sophia had asked on her 10th birthday, why do you cry when you think we can't hear you? Her question had caught Marcus off guard, and he realized that his daughters possessed an awareness that went beyond normal sensory compensation. Elena had added, we can feel your sadness, Papa. It tastes like metal and sounds like distant thunder. Their insights were often unnervingly accurate, leading Marcus to wonder if their blindness had opened doors to perceptions that sighted people couldn't access. When they were 12, Elena had suddenly announced during dinner, there's a woman coming who smells like our dreams. Sophia had nodded in agreement, adding, she carries light in her hands, but she's very far away still. Marcus had dismissed these statements as childish fantasy, but as the years passed, both girls continued to speak of this mysterious woman with increasing detail and certainty. The night before Catherine Morris arrived at their penthouse, both twins had experienced the same vivid dream. They woke simultaneously, calling out for their father with unprecedented urgency. Papa, she's here. Sophia had exclaimed, her face flushed with excitement. The woman from our dreams, she's in the city now. Elena had grabbed his hand with trembling fingers. She has eyes like stars, Papa, and she knows our names. She knows why we can't see, and she knows how to fix it. Marcus had tried to comfort them, attributing their shared dream to the psychological phenomenon of twin telepathy that their doctors had mentioned, but something in their voices had made him deeply uneasy. That night, he had stood in his study, staring at a photograph from Cambodia, the last picture taken of Kimley Shrey before her village was destroyed. In the background of the image, barely visible, stood a young woman with strikingly familiar features, and Marcus realized with growing dread that she bore an uncanny resemblance to the cleaning lady the service had described when scheduling the next day's appointment. The coincidence seemed impossible, but Marcus had learned long ago that some forces in the universe didn't follow the rules of probability and logic. As dawn broke over Manhattan, he found himself praying for the first time in decades, though whether for forgiveness or protection, he couldn't say. Catherine Morris stepped off the elevator with the quiet confidence of someone who had traveled a very long way to arrive at this exact moment. She carried herself like royalty disguised as a servant, and her eyes, those star-like eyes the twins had dreamed about, seemed to see through the opulent facade of the penthouse to the guilt and fear that Marcus had hidden for 2 decades. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in his bones, "your daughters have been waiting for me." It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of destiny fulfilled. Sophia and Elena rose from their seats as if pulled by invisible strings, their faces turning toward Catherine with expressions of wonder and recognition. "You're here," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're really here." Catherine approached them with the reverence of a pilgrim reaching a sacred shrine, and when she placed her hands on their faces, both girls gasped as if touched by lightning. "My grandmother sends her love," Catherine said softly, her words causing Marcus to stagger backward as if physically struck. "She wants you to know that her anger has cooled with the years, replaced by something far more powerful than vengeance." Sophia reached up to touch Catherine's face, her fingertips tracing features she had somehow already memorized. "You have her eyes," she said with certainty that defied explanation. "And her heart." The revelation of Catherine's true identity sent shockwaves through Marcus's carefully constructed world, forcing him to confront the reality that some actions create consequences that transcend generations. "Kimley Shrey was my grandmother," Catherine confirmed, settling onto the sofa between the twins as if she belonged there. "She raised me on stories of the sacred groves and the foreign man who destroyed them, but she also raised me on stories of redemption and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds." Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "She cursed my daughters for my crimes. How is that love?" Catherine's smile held depths of wisdom that seemed impossible for someone her age. "She didn't curse them, Mr. Blackwood. She protected them." The room seemed to shift around them as Catherine continued her explanation, her words unraveling the assumptions Marcus had carried for 16 years. "The blindness isn't punishment, it's a shield. My grandmother saw into the future, saw the darkness that would surround your family, the enemies you would make, the dangers that would threaten your children. She blinded them to protect them from seeing the horrors their father's empire was built upon, from becoming corrupted by wealth gained through suffering." Elena gripped her sister's hand tightly as understanding dawned on their faces. "We are not broken," Sophia said with growing amazement. "We are protected." Catherine nodded, reaching into her bag to retrieve the shimmering vial that seemed to contain liquid starlight. "But protection and healing are different gifts, and the time for healing has come." The transformation that followed challenged every law of physics and medicine that Marcus had ever believed in, yet he watched it happen with his own eyes. As the mystical liquid touched his daughter's lips, the change began immediately, not just in their vision, but in their entire being. Their eyes cleared like windows being wiped clean, revealing not just the ability to see, but a depth of perception that went far beyond normal sight. Sophia blinked and immediately began to weep, not from sadness but from overwhelming joy as she saw her sister's face for the first time. "Elena," she breathed, reaching out to trace her twin's features, "you're even more beautiful than I imagined." Elena's own transformation was equally miraculous, her previously clouded eyes now sparkling with intelligence and wonder as she took in the world around her. They could see not just the physical realm, but something deeper, the auras of emotion that surrounded people, the threads of connection that bound souls together, the very fabric of reality that most humans never perceive. "Papa," Elena said, looking at Marcus with eyes that now held the wisdom of ages, "we can see who you really are now. Not the man you pretend to be for the world, but your true self, wounded and guilty, but also capable of great love." Catherine gathered her cleaning supplies, her mission complete, but the twins' newfound sight revealed something that stopped her in her tracks. Around Marcus, they could see chains of darkness that bound him to his past crimes, but they could also see golden threads of light that connected him to every act of kindness he had ever performed, every moment of genuine love he had shown his daughters. The boardroom of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals buzzed with nervous energy as Marcus faced his executive team for what he knew would be the last time as CEO. Around the polished mahogany table sat 12 of the most ruthless business minds in the pharmaceutical industry, men and women who had helped him build an empire worth over $50 billion through methods that would make governments topple if fully exposed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "I've called this emergency meeting to inform you of my immediate resignation and the complete restructuring of our operations." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whispered intake of breath from CFO Rebecca Sterling, whose own fortune was tied directly to the company's more questionable ventures. Dr. James Harrison, head of research and development, was the first to find his voice. "Marcus, what the hell are you talking about? We are on the verge of the biggest pharmaceutical breakthrough in decades with the Cambodian plant compounds. You can't just—" Marcus cut him off with a raised hand, and for the first time in 20 years, his gesture carried the weight of moral authority rather than mere corporate power. "The Cambodian research ends today, James. All of it. We are returning the patents to the indigenous communities, along with reparations for the damage we've caused." Rebecca Sterling shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage and disbelief. The revelation of Marcus's decision sent shockwaves through the pharmaceutical industry and beyond, as news outlets struggled to understand why one of the world's most successful businessmen would voluntarily dismantle his own empire. "This has to be some kind of hostile takeover," speculated financial analyst Jonathan Reed on Bloomberg News, his voice carrying the bewilderment of someone watching their understanding of capitalism crumble. "Nobody just gives away $50 billion because they had a change of heart." But Marcus's press conference the following day left no doubt about his sincerity or his sanity. Standing before a room packed with reporters, flanked by his daughters who could now see the flashing cameras and curious faces for the first time, Marcus delivered a confession that would redefine corporate responsibility for generations to come. 20 years ago, I made decisions that destroyed communities and cost lives in the pursuit of profit," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room and across television screens worldwide. "I told myself that the ends justified the means, that medical advancement required sacrifice, that progress demanded difficult choices. I was wrong." Sophia and Elena stood beside their father, their newly restored sight allowing them to see the faces of the journalists as they processed the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Elena stepped forward to the microphone, her young voice clear and strong. "My sister and I were born blind because of our father's actions, but we don't hate him for it. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what really matters." The media firestorm that followed Marcus's confession was unlike anything the business world had ever seen, with journalists digging deeper into Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' past and uncovering a web of corruption that stretched across 6 continents. Investigative reporter Sarah Chen, whose grandmother had been a contemporary of Kimberly Schrey, published a series of articles detailing the systematic exploitation of indigenous knowledge that had built the modern pharmaceutical industry. "The Blackwood case isn't unique," Chen wrote in her Pulitzer-winning exposé. "It's simply the first time someone with this level of power has been willing to tell the truth about how these empires are really built." Her investigation revealed that dozens of major pharmaceutical companies had engaged in similar practices, stealing traditional remedies and patenting them without compensation or consent from the communities that had developed them over centuries. Marcus's confession had opened floodgates that threatened to drown the entire industry in a tsunami of lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and public outrage. Stock markets around the world trembled as investors realized that the companies they had trusted with their money had built their fortunes on a foundation of theft and exploitation. The pharmaceutical industry's lobbyists worked overtime to distance their clients from Blackwood's isolated case, but the damage was spreading faster than they could contain it. Countries that had been the victims of biopiracy began demanding the return of their intellectual property and compensation for decades of lost revenue. Marcus found himself at the center of a global movement for corporate accountability that he had never intended to start, with indigenous rights activists and pharmaceutical reform advocates hailing him as an unlikely hero. "What Mr. Blackwood has done takes tremendous courage," said Maria Santos, director of the Global Indigenous Rights Coalition, during a press conference in Geneva. "He's shown that it's possible for those in power to choose justice over profit, even when it costs them everything." But not everyone saw Marcus's transformation in such positive terms. Former colleagues denounced him as a traitor to capitalism itself, while competitors scrambled to acquire Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' assets at fire sale prices before his promised reforms could take effect. Death threats arrived daily at his penthouse, forcing Marcus to hire private security for his family, though he insisted the guards be drawn from indigenous communities that his company had wronged. "If I'm going to be protected," he told his security coordinator, "it should be by people who have the most reason to want me dead." The irony wasn't lost on him that his safety now depended on the mercy of those he had spent decades exploiting. Sophia and Elena adapted to their newfound celebrity with the grace that only comes from having experienced genuine suffering, using their platform to speak about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of seeing beyond surface appearances. The legal ramifications of Marcus's confession created a labyrinth of international litigation that would take decades to fully resolve, with governments, communities, and individuals filing claims against Blackwood Pharmaceuticals and its subsidiary companies. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who had made a career defending indigenous intellectual property rights, found herself coordinating the largest class action lawsuit in corporate history. "We are not just seeking financial compensation," Walsh explained to the United Nations Human Rights Council. "We are trying to establish a legal framework that prevents this kind of exploitation from happening again." Marcus cooperated fully with every investigation, providing documents and testimony that implicated dozens of other companies in similar schemes. His willingness to expose industry-wide corruption earned him a reduced sentence in the criminal proceedings that followed, but more importantly, it accelerated global reforms in pharmaceutical patent law. The International Court of Justice established new protocols for the ethical development of traditional medicine, requiring companies to share profits with the communities that provided their source materials. Universities began teaching mandatory courses on bioethics and indigenous rights, while medical schools added traditional healing practices to their curricula alongside conventional treatments. The ripple effects of one man's confession were reshaping an entire industry, proving that even the darkest secrets, when brought to light, could become catalysts for positive change. Catherine Morris watched these developments unfold from her garden in upstate New York, tending to the same varieties of healing plants that her grandmother had protected in Cambodia decades earlier. Reporters occasionally found their way to her door, seeking interviews about her role in Marcus's transformation, but she politely declined to comment beyond saying that healing happens in its own time and its own way. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the twins' restored sight had made Catherine something of a folk hero in indigenous communities worldwide, though she rejected any suggestion that she possessed supernatural powers. "I'm just a gardener," she would tell anyone who asked, her star-like eyes twinkling with hidden knowledge. "Plants know how to heal. We just have to listen to them." Her garden had become an informal pilgrimage site for people seeking their own healing and redemption, and Catherine welcomed them all with the same gentle wisdom she had shown the Blackwood family. She established a school on her property where traditional healers could share their knowledge with modern medical practitioners, creating bridges between ancient wisdom and contemporary science. The curriculum included not just herbal medicine and healing techniques, but also lessons in ethics, responsibility, and the interconnectedness of all living things. Students came from around the world to study under Catherine's guidance, and many left to establish similar programs in their home countries, spreading a new model of medicine that honored both innovation and tradition. The transformation of Marcus's business empire into a force for good rather than exploitation created a new model for corporate responsibility that other companies began to emulate, sometimes voluntarily and sometimes under pressure from activists and regulators. The Blackwood Foundation, established with the assets from Marcus's former pharmaceutical company, became one of the world's largest supporters of indigenous rights and traditional medicine research. Under the joint leadership of Sophia and Elena, who had inherited their father's business acumen along with their restored sight, the foundation funded projects that returned stolen knowledge to its rightful communities and supported sustainable development that benefited local populations rather than outside investors. "We've learned that true sight isn't just about seeing with our eyes," Sophia explained during a TED Talk that garnered over 50 million views. "It's about seeing the connections between all living things and our responsibility to protect them." The twins' unique perspective, shaped by their years of blindness and their dramatic restoration, gave them credibility with audiences that would have dismissed traditional corporate messaging as empty public relations. They spoke at universities, government forums, and international conferences, sharing their story and advocating for a more ethical approach to business and medicine. Their message resonated particularly strongly with young people who were already questioning the values of their elders and seeking alternatives to the destructive patterns of previous generations. Elena's particular focus on environmental healing led to groundbreaking research on the connection between ecosystem destruction and human disease, while Sophia's work with displaced communities helped establish new international standards for corporate accountability in developing nations. Catherine Morris had spent 37 years preparing for the moment she would walk into Marcus Blackwood's penthouse, though the preparation had begun long before her birth in her grandmother's careful prophesies and meticulous planning. Kimberly Shrey had not died in despair when the bulldozers came for her sacred grove. She had died in the serene confidence of someone who had seen the future and knew that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail. "The wheel turns slowly, little one," she had whispered to her 5-year-old granddaughter as the machines destroyed their ancestral home, "but it always turns toward balance in the end." Catherine's childhood had been spent in refugee camps and charity shelters, learning languages and customs that would allow her to move invisibly through the world of her family's destroyers. By age 16, she spoke 7 languages fluently and could blend seamlessly into any culture, skills that would prove essential for her eventual infiltration of Marcus's life. Her grandmother's spirit had guided her education through a series of mentors and teachers who appeared at crucial moments, each one adding another layer to her preparation for the destiny that awaited her. At Harvard, she studied biochemistry under professors who had no idea that their brightest student was secretly documenting their lectures as intelligence for a very different kind of mission. At Cambridge, she earned advanced degrees in anthropology and religious studies, immersing herself in the academic study of the very traditions that her grandmother had lived and breathed. Her dissertation on healing practices in post-colonial Southeast Asia won international acclaim and became required reading in medical schools, though few knew that its author had access to sources and knowledge that no purely academic researcher could have obtained. The network of allies that Catherine assembled over the decades read like a roster from a supernatural thriller, including indigenous shamans, rogue scientists, reformed corporate executives, and whistleblowing journalists who had all been touched in some way by the pharmaceutical industry's exploitation. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the pediatric ophthalmologist who had examined the twins, had been recruited after her own grandmother died from a disease that could have been cured by traditional remedies that pharmaceutical companies had patented and priced beyond the reach of poor communities. "I've spent my career trying to heal children," Dr. Chen had told Catherine during their clandestine meeting in a Bangkok coffee shop. "But how can I heal them when the system I work for is what's making them sick?" Her willingness to provide Catherine with detailed medical records and insider information about the twins' condition proved crucial to the success of the plan. Financial analyst Marcus Rivera had joined the network after discovering that his investment firm was unknowingly funding the destruction of his family's ancestral lands in the Amazon. Investigative reporter Sarah Chen, despite sharing a surname with Dr. Chen, was actually Dr. Chen's distant cousin, and their grandmother's stories of traditional healing had inspired both women to use their professional positions to fight back against the system that had silenced their ancestors. Each member of the network brought unique skills and access that Catherine wove together into a plan that spanned continents and decades, all focused on the singular goal of bringing Marcus Blackwood to account for his crimes while healing the daughters who had paid the price for his greed. Catherine's infiltration of the cleaning service that Marcus used required 18 months of careful planning and the cooperation of the service's owner, Maria Santos, whose family had been displaced by one of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' operations in Guatemala. "I've been waiting my whole life for a chance to make that bastard pay," Maria had said when Catherine approached her with the plan. "If you can really help those blind girls while taking him down, you have my full support." The psychological profile that Catherine had developed of Marcus over the years revealed a man tormented by guilt but too proud and too frightened to admit his mistakes, trapped in a cycle of accumulating wealth and power as a way to avoid confronting the damage he had caused. She knew that a direct approach would only trigger his defenses and likely result in her removal from his life before she could complete her mission. Instead, she crafted a persona that would allow her to observe him and his daughters closely while gradually introducing elements that would prepare them all for the eventual revelation and choice that would define their futures. The lavender and sage scents that Sophia had immediately noticed were carefully selected to trigger ancestral memories that lay dormant in the twins' subconscious, while the stories Catherine told them were encoded with information that would help them understand and accept the truth when it was finally revealed. Every interaction was choreographed to build trust and emotional connection, while planting seeds of awareness that would bloom at precisely the right moment. The mystical vial that Catherine had carried contained ingredients gathered from 6 continents over 15 years, each component blessed by traditional healers who had agreed to contribute their power to the restoration of sight and justice. The water had been collected from sacred springs in Tibet during the full moon, mixed with essence of flowers that bloomed only in the ruins of ancient temples, and charged with the prayers of hundreds of indigenous shamans who had lost their own sacred sites to corporate exploitation. "This isn't magic," Catherine had explained to her network of allies during their final planning meeting. "It's the concentrated essence of community healing, the power that comes when people unite their intentions for justice and restoration." The scientific-minded members of the network struggled to understand how such a mixture could possibly restore sight to congenitally blind children, but Catherine's grandmother had taught her that Western science was only one way of understanding reality, and that some healings required approaches that transcended the limitations of materialist thinking. Dr. Chen had provided medical cover for the miracle by preparing false documentation that would suggest the twins' sight had been restored through an experimental gene therapy that Blackwood Pharmaceuticals had been secretly developing, giving Marcus a cover story that would protect Catherine's true identity if he chose to seek rational explanations for the impossible. The beauty of the plan was that it offered Marcus multiple ways to understand what had happened, from supernatural intervention to cutting-edge science, allowing him to choose the explanation that his worldview could accept while still requiring him to confront the moral choice at the heart of the situation. The moment of revelation in the penthouse had been rehearsed in Catherine's mind thousands of times, but the actual experience of facing Marcus while his daughters drank the healing potion surpassed even her grandmother's vivid prophecies of how events would unfold. Seeing Sophia and Elena's eyes clear for the first time, watching their faces light up as they beheld their father and each other, feeling the years of preparation and sacrifice crystallize into this single perfect moment of healing and justice, Catherine understood for the first time why her grandmother had been willing to die for this cause. "Your daughters are not just healed," she had told Marcus as the twins marveled at their restored vision. "They are awakened to their true purpose in this world." The supernatural sight that the twins now possessed allowed them to see beyond the physical realm into the emotional and spiritual dimensions that most humans could only sense subconsciously, and Catherine knew that this gift would make them powerful forces for healing in a world desperately in need of their unique perspective. As she prepared to leave the penthouse for the last time in her role as their housekeeper, Catherine felt her grandmother's spirit settle into peaceful rest, knowing that the circle of justice and redemption had finally been completed. The network of allies who had supported her mission would now shift their focus to protecting and guiding the Blackwood family as they navigated the challenges that would come with Marcus's public confession and the twins' emergence as advocates for a new kind of corporate responsibility. Catherine herself would return to her garden and her school, training the next generation of healers who would carry forward the work of bridging ancient wisdom and modern medicine. But her connection to Sophia and Elena would endure as long as they continued to use their gifts in service of justice and healing. The epilogue to Catherine's story unfolded not in dramatic confrontations or supernatural displays, but in the quiet satisfaction of watching the seed she had planted grow into a forest of positive change that spread across the globe. 5 years after the twins' healing, Catherine received regular updates from her network about the Blackwood Foundation's work and the ripple effects that Marcus's confession had created throughout the pharmaceutical industry and beyond. Universities now offered degrees in ethical pharmaceutical development, with Catherine's own writings serving as foundational texts for students who would enter the industry with very different values than their predecessors. The International Criminal Court had established new categories of crimes against indigenous communities, with the Blackwood case serving as the precedent for prosecuting corporate leaders who engaged in cultural theft and environmental destruction. Most importantly, a new generation of healers was emerging from Catherine's school and similar institutions around the world, people who understood that true healing required addressing not just physical symptoms but the social, environmental, and spiritual causes of disease. Sophia and Elena visited Catherine's garden every summer, their supernatural sight allowing them to see the network of energy and intention that connected all the healing plants in her collection, and each visit deepened their understanding of their own gifts and responsibilities. "We see the world differently because of what you did for us," Elena had told Catherine during their most recent visit, "but more importantly, we see ourselves differently, not as victims of our father's crimes, but as healers who can help others find their way from darkness to light." Catherine's response had been characteristically humble. "You were always healers, dear ones. I simply helped you remember who you truly are." The morning after their sight was restored, Sophia and Elena Blackwood woke to discover that their vision encompassed far more than the physical world that other people perceived, extending into dimensions of reality that most humans could only glimpse in dreams or moments of profound spiritual awakening. As sunlight streamed through their bedroom windows, they could see not just the golden rays illuminating dust motes in the air, but the actual life force energy that flowed through every particle of matter, connecting all living things in a web of luminous threads that pulsed with the rhythm of existence itself. "Elena, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Sophia whispered, her voice filled with wonder as she watched streams of colored light flow between the plants on their windowsill, carrying information and nutrients in patterns that seemed to follow some cosmic choreography. Elena nodded slowly, her eyes wide with amazement as she observed the same phenomenon. "It's like everything is alive and talking to everything else," she breathed, extending her hand toward a nearby orchid and watching as tendrils of silver light reached out to caress her fingers, conveying sensations of warmth, growth, and contentment that she could feel in her own body. The twins spent hours that first day simply sitting by the window, learning to interpret the visual language of energy and connection that their supernatural sight had revealed, gradually understanding that they were seeing the fundamental building blocks of reality that mystics and physicists had long theorized but few had ever directly observed. Their father found them there that evening, still transfixed by the light show that only they could perceive, and when he asked what they were looking at, Sophia's explanation left him speechless. "We are watching the universe have a conversation with itself, Papa, and we are part of the conversation now." The twins' newfound ability to see auras and energy fields around living beings proved both fascinating and overwhelming, as they discovered that every person carried a unique signature of colors and patterns that revealed their emotional states, health conditions, and even their deepest thoughts and intentions. When Marcus entered their room that second morning, Sophia gasped at the sight of dark chains of energy wrapped around his body like spiritual shackles, while golden threads of light emanated from his heart whenever he looked at his daughters with genuine love. "Papa, you're carrying so much pain," Elena said gently, her enhanced vision allowing her to see the specific traumas and guilt that had shaped her father's aura into its current tortured configuration. "But there's also so much light in you. It's just buried under all the darkness you've been holding onto." Marcus sat heavily in the chair beside their beds, his voice breaking as he asked, "What else can you see? What other secrets are written on my soul for you to read?" Sophia reached out to touch his hand, her supernatural sight revealing the moment of contact as an explosion of sparkling light that flowed between them like liquid starfire. "We can see that you're going to be okay, Papa. The darkness isn't permanent. It's just energy that needs to be transformed, and you're already starting to do that." The twins' ability to perceive the spiritual dimension of healing gave them insights that went far beyond conventional medicine, allowing them to see illness as patterns of disrupted energy that could be corrected through specific combinations of intention, emotion, and physical intervention. The revelation of their enhanced perception abilities attracted the attention of researchers and mystics from around the world, all eager to study or learn from the twins who could apparently see the invisible architecture of reality itself. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum physicist from Tokyo who specialized in consciousness studies, arrived at their penthouse with equipment designed to measure and document supernatural phenomena, hoping to provide scientific validation for the twins' extraordinary claims. "If you can really see energy fields and auras," Dr. Tanaka explained as she set up her sensors and cameras, "then we should be able to detect corresponding changes in electromagnetic radiation and quantum field fluctuations in your environment." The twins agreed to the testing with the curiosity of young people who had always wondered if their experiences were unique or universal, and the results exceeded even Dr. Tanaka's wildest expectations. When Sophia focused her attention on a plant across the room, the sensitive instruments registered measurable changes in the electromagnetic field between her location and the plant, as if her consciousness was somehow interacting with the target at a distance. Elena's ability to see auras produced even more dramatic results, with the equipment detecting subtle variations in the electromagnetic signatures of test subjects that correlated precisely with the colors and patterns that Elena described. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Tanaka whispered as she reviewed the data, her scientific worldview expanding to accommodate phenomena that she had previously relegated to the realm of fantasy. "You're not just seeing things that are invisible to others, you're actually detecting real, measurable aspects of reality that we don't have the technology to perceive directly." The twins' enhanced sight also revealed the spiritual dimensions of their family's healing process, showing them that their father's confession and transformation had created ripples of positive energy that extended far beyond their immediate household. When Marcus appeared on television to announce the dissolution of his pharmaceutical empire, Sophia and Elena could see streams of golden light flowing from the broadcast to millions of viewers around the world, carrying seeds of inspiration and change that would manifest in countless acts of courage and conscience. "Look, Elena!" Sophia exclaimed during one of their father's interviews, pointing at the screen where only they could see the miraculous display. "Every time he tells the truth, it creates these beautiful sparks of light that fly out to touch other people's hearts. He's healing the whole world just by healing himself." Elena watched in fascination as some of those sparks found fertile ground in viewers who were wrestling with their own ethical dilemmas, growing into bright flames of motivation that would drive them to make their own difficult but necessary choices. The twins began to understand that their supernatural sight wasn't just a gift for their personal use, but a tool for witnessing and perhaps guiding the spiritual evolution of humanity itself. They could see how individual acts of courage and compassion created networks of positive energy that strengthened the entire web of human consciousness, while acts of greed and cruelty created dark spots that weakened the whole system. Their unique perspective gave them hope during the difficult months that followed their father's confession, as they could see that the temporary chaos and conflict were actually signs of a deeper healing process taking place in the collective human spirit. The most profound aspect of the twins' supernatural vision was their ability to see the connections between past, present, and future events, observing how decisions made decades ago continued to influence current circumstances while simultaneously seeing the potential outcomes that different choices might create. During quiet moments in their father's study, surrounded by the artifacts and documents from his corporate empire, Sophia and Elena could see ghostly images of the Cambodian villagers whose lives had been destroyed by his decisions, but they could also see the spirits of those same people smiling with forgiveness and gratitude as they witnessed Marcus's redemption and the positive changes flowing from his confession. "They're not angry anymore," Sophia told her father during one of these visions, her voice filled with wonder at the complexity of spiritual justice. "They can see what their sacrifice accomplished, how their suffering became the catalyst for all this healing. They're actually celebrating." Elena added her own observations about the future possibilities that shimmered at the edges of their enhanced perception. "We can see children who haven't been born yet, Papa, growing up in a world where companies like yours protect the environment instead of destroying it. The changes you're making now are going to echo forward for generations." The twins' ability to perceive these temporal connections gave them a sense of purpose and urgency about their role as witnesses and healers, understanding that they had been given their gifts not just for their own benefit, but to serve as bridges between the visible and invisible worlds, helping others understand the deeper spiritual laws that govern existence. Catherine Morris visited the twins regularly during their first year of supernatural sight, helping them understand and integrate their new abilities while teaching them techniques for managing the overwhelming flood of information that constantly flowed through their enhanced perception. "Your sight is both a gift and a responsibility," Catherine explained during one of her garden walks with the girls, her own aura shimmering with the calm authority of someone who had mastered similar abilities through decades of practice. "You must learn to focus and filter what you see, or the constant input will drive you mad. But you must also learn to trust what you perceive, even when it contradicts what others believe to be true." The training sessions took place in Catherine's garden, where the concentrated life energy of hundreds of healing plants created an ideal environment for developing psychic abilities. Sophia discovered that she had a particular talent for seeing the energetic signatures of illnesses and injuries, her vision revealing dark spots and disrupted patterns in people's auras that corresponded precisely to their physical and emotional ailments. Elena's gift manifested as an ability to see the spiritual lessons and growth opportunities that were embedded in people's suffering, allowing her to offer guidance and hope to those who felt lost or broken. Together, the twins learned to use their supernatural sight as a diagnostic tool that could identify problems and solutions that conventional medicine might miss, combining their enhanced perception with their father's resources to create a new model of holistic healing that addressed the spiritual roots of physical disease. The global impact of the twins' abilities became apparent as word of their gifts spread through networks of healers, researchers, and spiritual seekers who had been waiting for proof that human consciousness could transcend the limitations of ordinary perception. Medical schools began incorporating courses on energy healing and aura reading into their curricula, while hospitals established new departments focused on treating the spiritual dimensions of illness alongside the physical symptoms. "What Sophia and Elena have shown us," wrote Dr. Michael Chang in his groundbreaking paper on consciousness-based medicine, "is that healing is not just about fixing broken bodies, but about restoring the flow of life energy that connects all living systems." The twins themselves became reluctant celebrities in the emerging field of supernatural medicine, traveling to conferences and workshops where they demonstrated their abilities while teaching others to develop their own latent psychic gifts. Their message was always the same: extraordinary perception wasn't limited to a chosen few, but was a natural human capacity that had been suppressed by a materialistic culture that denied the reality of spiritual dimensions. "Everyone can learn to see what we see," Elena explained to a packed auditorium at Harvard Medical School, her words carrying the conviction of someone who had experienced both blindness and supernatural sight. "The question isn't whether these abilities are real, but whether we are brave enough to open our eyes to a bigger reality than the one we've been taught to accept." Sophia added her own perspective on the healing potential of enhanced perception. "When you can see the energy connections between all living things, it becomes impossible to harm others without harming yourself. That's why our father's transformation was inevitable. Once you really see how everything is connected, you can't choose separation and exploitation anymore." The boardroom fell silent as Marcus Blackwood stood before the assembled pharmaceutical executives, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. Rebecca Sterling, his longtime CFO, sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere and leaned forward with growing concern. "Marcus, whatever you're planning to say, think very carefully about the consequences," she warned, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had helped build and protect his empire for over a decade. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Marcus met her gaze with eyes that no longer held the cold calculation of a corporate predator, but rather the weary wisdom of a man who had finally chosen truth over profit. "Rebecca, the secrets we've buried have been slowly poisoning us for 20 years. My daughter's blindness was just the beginning, We've all been blind to the damage we've caused, the lives we've destroyed, the communities we've obliterated in the name of medical progress. Dr. James Harrison slammed his palm on the table, his face flushed with rage and disbelief. You can't seriously be considering exposing Project Serpent. Do you have any idea what that would do to our stock price, our partnerships, our entire industry? Marcus nodded slowly, his voice gaining strength as he continued. I know exactly what it will do, James. It will destroy everything we've built on a foundation of theft and exploitation. And that's exactly what needs to happen. The revelation of Project Serpent, the code name for Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' systematic theft of traditional medicine from indigenous communities, would indeed shatter more than just one company's reputation. The press conference that Marcus scheduled for the following week became the most watched corporate announcement in business history, with every major news network providing live coverage as the pharmaceutical industry held its collective breath. Standing behind a podium at the Four Seasons Hotel in Manhattan, flanked by his daughters whose miraculous restored sight had already generated intense media speculation, Marcus began his confession with words that would be quoted in business schools and ethics courses for generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today not as a successful businessman, but as a man who has spent 20 years running from the truth about how my success was achieved. The room erupted in camera flashes and shouted questions, but Marcus continued with the focused intensity of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals built its fortune by stealing traditional medicine from indigenous communities around the world, patenting their ancestral knowledge, and selling it back to them at prices they could never afford. Sophia stepped forward to the microphone cluster, her clear young voice cutting through the chaos of the press room. My sister and I were born blind because of our father's crimes, but our blindness taught us to see with more than just our eyes. We learned to see the connections between all living things, the price that others pay for our comfort, the responsibility we all share for healing the damage that greed has caused. The immediate aftermath of Marcus's confession sent shockwaves through global financial markets as investors struggled to comprehend the implications of a Fortune 500 CEO voluntarily admitting to decades of systematic corporate crime. Within hours of the press conference, Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' stock price had plummeted by 70%, triggering automatic trading halts and emergency meetings at investment firms around the world. This is unprecedented, announced CNBC anchor Sarah Williams during an emergency market update, her voice reflecting the bewilderment of financial analysts who had never seen anything like Marcus's voluntary corporate suicide. We are watching a man destroy his own empire in real time, and the ripple effects are spreading throughout the entire pharmaceutical sector. Elena joined her father at a second podium, her supernatural sight allowing her to see the streams of energy flowing from the broadcast to millions of viewers around the globe, carrying seeds of change that would sprout in ways that no one could predict. What my father has done takes tremendous courage, she said, her words resonating with viewers who were struggling to understand how a billionaire could choose moral redemption over material wealth. But it also takes tremendous love for us, his daughters, but also love for all the people who have been harmed by the industry he helped create. The twins' presence at the press conference added an emotional dimension to the story that transcended mere business news, transforming Marcus's confession into a parable about redemption, family, and the power of love to overcome even the darkest legacy of greed and exploitation. The legal ramifications of Marcus's confession unfolded with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche, as prosecutors in dozens of countries opened investigations into Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' operations and other companies scrambled to distance themselves from the expanding scandal. Attorney General Patricia Hayes announced the formation of a special task force to investigate what she called the systematic theft of indigenous intellectual property by multinational pharmaceutical corporations, with Marcus's testimony serving as the foundation for what would become the largest corporate prosecution in American history. Mr. Blackwood's confession has opened a door that we cannot and will not close, Hayes declared during a Justice Department press conference, her words carrying the weight of inevitable justice finally arriving after decades of delay. We will follow the evidence wherever it leads, no matter how many powerful people and institutions are implicated. The FBI raided Blackwood Pharmaceuticals' headquarters and subsidiary offices around the world, seizing millions of documents that detailed not only the company's own crimes but also its collaborations with competitors who had engaged in similar practices. International arrest warrants were issued for dozens of former Blackwood executives who had fled to countries without extradition treaties, while Swiss banks found themselves under investigation for laundering money that had been stolen from indigenous communities. The scandal metastasized beyond the pharmaceutical industry to implicate agricultural corporations, cosmetics companies, and even universities that had participated in the theft and commercialization of traditional knowledge. The human cost of Marcus's revelation became apparent as indigenous communities around the world stepped forward to share their stories of exploitation and loss, adding personal faces and voices to what might otherwise have been dismissed as merely another corporate scandal. Maria Ixchel, a Maya healer whose grandmother had been murdered for refusing to reveal the secrets of traditional plant medicine, testified before a congressional hearing about the decades of poverty and illness that her community had endured while pharmaceutical companies profited from their stolen knowledge. "They took our medicine and made billions of dollars," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, "while our children died from diseases that our own plants could have cured, if we could have afforded to buy back what was already ours." The testimony of hundreds of similar witnesses from 6 continents painted a picture of systematic cultural genocide that had been hidden behind the respectable facade of medical research and development. Dr. Robert Kim, a Korean-American anthropologist who had spent his career documenting the theft of traditional medicine, provided expert testimony that established the scope of the problem. What we are dealing with here isn't just corporate crime, it's cultural extinction. These companies haven't just stolen formulas and compounds, they've destroyed entire systems of knowledge that took thousands of years to develop. The emotional impact of these testimonies, combined with the hard evidence that Marcus's cooperation had provided, created an unstoppable momentum for justice that no amount of corporate lobbying could derail. The transformation of Marcus himself during the months following his confession became a subject of intense media fascination, as journalists struggled to understand how a man who had been the embodiment of ruthless capitalism could evolve into an advocate for indigenous rights and corporate accountability. "I wake up every morning and see my daughters' faces," Marcus explained during an interview with 60 Minutes, his voice carrying none of the polished corporate speak that had characterized his previous media appearances. "They can see things now that I'm still learning to perceive. The connections between all living beings, the way that our actions ripple out to affect people we'll never meet, the responsibility we all have to heal the damage we've caused." His transformation wasn't just philosophical but practical, as he liquidated his personal assets to fund legal defense funds for the communities that his company had victimized, while using his insider knowledge to help prosecutors build cases against other pharmaceutical executives who had participated in similar crimes. The Marcus Blackwood who emerged from the wreckage of his corporate empire bore little resemblance to the cold, calculating businessmen who had built that empire through exploitation and theft. Sophia and Elena's supernatural sight allowed them to see the spiritual dimension of their father's transformation, watching as the dark chains of guilt and greed that had bound his soul gradually dissolved, replaced by golden threads of connection and compassion that linked him to every person whose life he touched. "Papa isn't the same man who destroyed those villages," Sophia explained to a reporter who questioned whether Marcus's remorse was genuine or merely a legal strategy. "We can see his soul, and it's completely different now, filled with light instead of darkness, love instead of fear." The global response to Marcus's confession catalyzed a broader movement for corporate accountability and indigenous rights that extended far beyond the pharmaceutical industry, inspiring activists, legislators, and ordinary citizens to demand transparency and justice from the multinational corporations that shaped their daily lives. Universities established new programs in decolonized medicine that taught students to recognize and respect traditional healing systems rather than simply appropriating them for commercial use. The United Nations passed the Indigenous Knowledge Protection Act, which created legal frameworks for preventing the theft of traditional medicine and ensuring that communities received fair compensation when their knowledge was used commercially. International courts began hearing cases under new statutes that classified the theft of indigenous knowledge as a form of cultural genocide, with penalties that included not just financial restitution but also mandated restoration of damaged ecosystems and communities. The Blackwood case became the template for a new form of corporate accountability that held executives personally responsible for their company's crimes against indigenous peoples and the environment. Most importantly, the courage that Marcus had shown in choosing confession over concealment inspired other whistleblowers and corporate insiders to come forward with their own revelations, creating a cascade of transparency that forced entire industries to confront and reform their most exploitative practices. The man who had once embodied the worst excesses of global capitalism had inadvertently become the catalyst for its most profound transformation, proving that even the darkest corporate empires could be redeemed through the simple but revolutionary act of telling the truth. The morning light streaming through the penthouse windows seemed different now, carrying with it not just photons and warmth but the promise of redemption that Marcus had never dared to hope for during his darkest years of guilt and self-loathing. Sophia and Elena sat across from him at the breakfast table, their newly restored sight allowing them to see not just his physical form but the gradual transformation of his spiritual essence from darkness to light. "Papa," Elena said softly, her supernatural vision revealing the golden threads of love that connected their hearts despite the years of separation caused by his crimes, We want you to know that we forgive you for everything, not because what you did wasn't terrible, but because we can see who you really are underneath all that guilt and pain." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper as he replied, "How can you forgive me when I destroyed so many lives? When your own blindness was the price of my greed?" Sophia reached across the table to take his hand, her touch sending visible sparks of healing energy between them that only she and Elena could perceive. Because love is stronger than guilt, Papa, and healing is stronger than harm. What you did in the past doesn't define who you choose to be today. The conversation marked the beginning of a healing process that would transform not just their family relationships but Marcus's entire understanding of what it meant to be human in a world where everyone's actions affected everyone else. The twins' ability to see the spiritual dimensions of forgiveness allowed them to guide their father through the complex process of releasing guilt while accepting responsibility, showing him that true redemption required not just confession but active commitment to making amends for past wrongs. The practical work of redemption began immediately, as Marcus threw himself into the monumental task of undoing decades of damage with the same intensity that he had once devoted to building his pharmaceutical empire. Working 18-hour days with teams of lawyers, activists, and community representatives, he developed comprehensive restitution plans for every village, tribe, and ecosystem that Blackwood Pharmaceuticals had harmed during its expansion across 6 continents. This isn't just about writing checks, Marcus explained to the board of directors he had assembled to oversee the company's transformation, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally found his true purpose in life. "We need to return not just the profits we stole, but the knowledge, the land, the dignity, and the future that we took from these communities." Dr. Sarah Lightfoot, a Lakota physician and traditional healer who had agreed to serve on the board despite her people's historical reasons to distrust corporate executives, challenged Marcus to go beyond financial restitution to address the deeper spiritual wounds that his company had inflicted. "Money can rebuild houses and fund schools," she said during their first board meeting, her dark eyes holding centuries of indigenous wisdom. "But how do you heal the trauma of having your sacred knowledge stolen and commercialized? How do you restore the connection between people and the land that pharmaceutical companies severed when they turned medicine into a commodity?" Marcus's response revealed the depth of his transformation. "We listen to you and your people, Dr. Lightfoot. We follow your guidance, support your leadership, and spend whatever time and resources it takes to heal wounds that we don't even fully understand yet." The establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, funded entirely by the liquidation of Marcus's personal assets, created an unprecedented model for corporate accountability that went far beyond traditional legal settlements to address the psychological and spiritual dimensions of institutional harm. Elena, whose supernatural sight allowed her to see the energetic patterns of trauma and healing, worked closely with indigenous elders and traditional healers to develop therapeutic approaches that could address collective wounds spanning multiple generations. "We are not just treating individual people," Elena explained during a foundation conference that brought together healers from around the world. "We are healing entire communities, entire ecosystems, entire ways of life that were nearly destroyed by corporate greed." Sophia's role in the foundation focused on documenting and preserving traditional knowledge systems that pharmaceutical companies had targeted for appropriation, creating digital archives and educational programs that would ensure this wisdom could be passed on to future generations without fear of exploitation. The twins' unique perspective, shaped by their experience of both blindness and supernatural sight, gave them credibility with indigenous communities who might otherwise have dismissed their efforts as another form of cultural colonization. Their youth, their genuine respect for traditional ways of knowing, and their father's complete commitment to making amends created bridges between cultures that had been separated by centuries of exploitation and mistrust. The international response to the Truth and Reconciliation Foundation's work demonstrated that Marcus's transformation had catalyzed a global awakening to the need for new models of corporate responsibility and indigenous rights protection. The European Union passed legislation requiring all pharmaceutical companies operating within its borders to provide detailed documentation of the sources of their traditional medicine-based products and to share profits equitably with the originating communities. The African Union established similar requirements, while simultaneously creating legal frameworks that allowed traditional healers to patent and protect their own knowledge systems from unauthorized commercial exploitation. Universities across North America began offering joint degree programs that combined conventional medical training with traditional healing practices, creating a new generation of physicians who understood medicine as both science and sacred practice. The ripple effects of Marcus's confession and the Foundation's work reached into boardrooms and classrooms, legislative chambers, and research laboratories, everywhere that people were beginning to recognize the connections between corporate accountability, social justice, and environmental healing. Catherine Morris, watching these developments from her garden sanctuary, saw in them the fulfillment of her grandmother's prophecies and the vindication of decades of patient planning and spiritual preparation. The most profound aspect of Marcus's redemption journey was his growing understanding that true healing required not just making amends for past wrongs, but committing to a completely different way of being in relationship with the world and its most vulnerable inhabitants. Under the guidance of indigenous teachers and with the support of his daughter's supernatural insights, Marcus began to experience reality as a web of interconnected relationships rather than a collection of resources to be exploited for profit. I spent 40 years seeing the world as a machine that I could manipulate for my own benefit, he reflected during a ceremony with Maya elders in Guatemala, where he had traveled to personally apologize for the destruction of their sacred sites. But now I'm learning to see it as a living being of which I'm just one small part, with responsibilities to every other part of the whole. His transformation from corporate predator to environmental healer wasn't without its challenges, as former colleagues and competitors viewed his conversion with suspicion, while some activists remained skeptical of his motives despite his dramatic sacrifices. The twins' supernatural sight proved invaluable during these difficult periods, as they could see the authentic spiritual transformation taking place in their father's energy field and help him stay focused on his healing work rather than getting defensive about criticism from those who couldn't perceive his inner changes. Sophia and Elena's ability to see the future implications of present actions also helped guide the Foundation's strategic decisions, allowing them to invest resources in initiatives that would have the greatest long-term impact on healing the wounds between indigenous communities and the global economy. The legacy of Marcus's redemption began to manifest in ways that extended far beyond the specific communities and individuals that Blackwood Pharmaceuticals had directly harmed, creating new possibilities for economic relationships based on cooperation rather than exploitation. The success of the profit-sharing agreements that the Foundation negotiated with indigenous communities inspired other industries to adopt similar models, leading to the emergence of what economists began calling the regenerative economy, a system that prioritized healing and restoration over extraction and consumption. Business schools incorporated the Blackwood case study into their core curricula, using Marcus's journey from corporate criminal to social healer as a template for teaching students about the long-term costs of unethical business practices and the transformative power of authentic accountability. The pharmaceutical industry itself began to evolve, with several major companies voluntarily adopting the transparency and profit-sharing standards that the Foundation had pioneered, recognizing that sustainable success required genuine partnership with the communities whose knowledge they sought to commercialize. Most significantly, Marcus's story inspired a new generation of business leaders who saw their roles not as maximizing shareholder wealth but as stewarding resources for the benefit of all stakeholders, including future generations and the natural systems upon which all economic activity ultimately depended. Sophia and Elena, now recognized as leaders in the emerging field of conscious business practice, continue to use their supernatural sight to guide companies and organizations toward more ethical and sustainable operations, proving that the healing their father had begun would continue long after his own journey was complete. The man who had once embodied everything wrong with global capitalism had become the unlikely catalyst for its evolution toward justice, sustainability, and respect for the wisdom of all Earth's peoples.